morning, and welcome to Morning Movie News, where, today's episode literally came together at the very last minute because it continues to be slim pickings in the movie news world. But I'm actually quite happy with the way this episode has come together, again at the last minute, but some really awesome stories showed up to save today's episode. Now, the first one is this picture of an X-Men Apocalypse Standee, which is literally just making the rounds this morning on Twitter. I had several people send me this photo, and I wanted to talk about it because A, it looks cool as the Standee, but also B, I can't believe that Jennifer Lawrence managed to get herself on the Standee not as Mystique in her, her true form, as Mystique herself believes that to be. I hope they've managed to write something into the script that shows why she's decided not to be all blue instead of it just being the preference of the actress at hand. But I think she's really pushing her luck with the whole "I don't want to be blue" thing with fans, right? I mean, to not even be blue on the Standee, I think is an odd choice because it not only, I think, potentially upsets fans like right away, but also Blue Mystique has been a major selling point for this franchise from day one. That's the whole reason that Bryan Singer actually created the character, so that she would, his famous quote is, "Blue boobs sell." That's the whole reason he created Mystique the way that she was, while he got a supermodel to play her, and to play her basically naked. Another famous quote I'll never forget from the franchise was Rebecca Romijn on set trying to tell her co-stars, like, "I'm not naked, right? I've got like a swimsuit on, right?" And they were like, "No, you're naked." And Jennifer Lawrence has gotten to be a big enough star that she's been able to, put the kibosh on that. And so I'm really curious, I'm very curious to see how fans are going to react to this when the movie hits theaters. I would have probably implemented more of everybody's powers into the poster. You can see a little bit of Psylocke's Psy Blade there, but in the comics, that's more of like a Psy Shiv, it looks like. It's supposed to be much longer, but there's always been like a cool factor to the X-Men films and also a sexiness factor, which I'm not, well, you know what, I have to say, I think James McAvoy's kind of bringing the sexy there as Professor X. He looks amazing, but I think they don't have the usual selling points that an X-Men film has. I mean, when you think of the X-Men Days of Future Past poster, that was one of the best X-Men posters I've ever seen. Probably the best X-Men poster. It was very colorful. It showed a lot of powers. They also had a very cool, motion poster at the junket with, lightning effects because of Storm. And I just feel like, I don't know. I mean, I know it's a Standee and there's only so much you can do, but it's very fascinating to see the evolution of this franchise, and I'm very curious to see how fans are going to react to it. I think on the one hand, though, on the other hand, it is cool to see the X-Men assembled. They are a team. They're still in black. They're black uniforms, but it's great to see Jean Grey in there. I wonder why you don't see Cyclops. You do see Jubilee. Havoc's not there either. Where are the Summers brothers? But also maybe they were like, oh, there's enough blue on this Standee as it is. We've already got Hank. We've already got Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler looks amazing, though, by the way. I love him in the crouched position. But, I would have preferred to have seen Beast as Nicholas Hoult because he hardly ever is in his Beast. He's like the opposite of Mystique, so why would you do that on the Standee? And, Quicksilver, I would have liked to have seen some movement from him. I think my biggest concern, and also Apocalypse, we have to talk about the fact that Apocalypse is so much bigger than them. That's the size he's supposed to be in the comics, so it's nice to see him there. I thought that was Jubilee actually in the middle, but I believe that might be a fan actually who's standing there, which is absolutely hilarious. That fan blends in quite well. I did not even notice that, so that's really interesting. But if I were Fox and also a theater owner, my biggest concern about this Standee would be vandalism. It looks super easy to punch one of these heads off or to perhaps rip a figure free and take it home. I would put that somewhere where people would be able to watch it very carefully. And if you were going to deface it, you would have an audience. So you'd have to be pretty bold. Although fortune favors the bold, I guess you could say, at least when it comes to Standee souvenirs. But I'm curious, what do you think of this? Does it get you excited for it? X-Men Apocalypse has a lot of competition this summer. And so I'm curious, do you think this is what you want out of an X-Men movie? X-Men Days of Future Past had the teams working together. I'm hoping to see that perhaps in the next trailer. That was a big thing, I think a selling point, and especially in the future sequences where you saw the X-Men using their powers in tandem, which is super awesome for comic book fans. And so I think what they have going here is basically, I think Nightcrawler, Professor Xavier, and Archangel are pretty, and also Psylocke are really right out of the comics. I think Storm we've had our hearts broken so many times before. I think we're not quite sure how to feel about that. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm very, very curious to see how this movie performs and what the Jennifer Lawrence factor does to it. All right, so that's our first story of the day. Now, speaking of Bryan Singer, he's actually our second story of the day as well, because he's lined up his next project after X-Men. He, got his career back on track thanks to the X-Men movies, and now he's going to go and try and make another one outside of that franchise yet again. He, of course, rose to fame with The Usual Suspects, but he hasn't really been able to, land any punches, so to speak, outside of the X-Men franchise post Usual Suspects. But he's going to try with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is interesting because his Jack the Giant Slayer movie did so poorly. It actually wasn't that bad a film. I watched it streaming, and I thought it was pretty solid, actually. But I think Bryan Singer, I don't know if he's very good at X-Men movies, but I don't know if he has the artistic vision and the bold vision to keep up with today's auteur directors that are being used in the blockbuster genre. I think it's very competitive right now, and I think that you really have to bring your A game. And I don't know if Bryan Singer has an A game, quite frankly, outside of the X-Men. I think no one can direct an X-Men movie like Bryan Singer, although he should have stood up to Jennifer Lawrence. But anyway, he's doing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He says it's a dream project, and you know what that means. You know it's going to have a lot of cute guys in it. Bryan Singer has his own personal taste, and I think it's very interesting to see that reflected in the films that he puts together. He is good at getting the blue boobs and all that, and Olivia Munn as Psylocke, but I think and Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique. But at the end of the day, often when you're watching the X-Men movies that he directs, I think you become very aware of Bryan Singer's preferences, and and I think it has an interesting effect on the film that you don't see in other blockbusters. So I always find that very amusing. So I look for the same situation with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. You're going to have the hottest crew on that ship possible. Insert your own jokes there. But anyway, what I'm very curious, and he also says he's going to add new characters and also different sci-fi elements. So it's going to be based on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That's going to be, the foundation for the film, but they're going to try and modernize it, which is a scary word when it comes to the classics, of course. But I think we'll see what happens. But what I'm really curious about is that they will have Captain Nemo. I would really like to see Captain Nemo be true to his origins as an Indian character. Now, the best version of Captain Nemo I've ever seen is League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And that's just a really great depiction of the character. They've gone on to, Alan Moore has gone on to tell the stories of Nemo's daughter who has inherited the ship. And it's just a wonderful character. And I think, again, it's very true to the source material. So I would really love to see that reflected in Bryan Singer's movie, especially if he's adding other characters. I think that he can have that kind of diversity. Also, Bollywood is a huge box office power, and also Southern India now with Bahubali. We were just talking about that yesterday. He has a ton of talent that he can choose from, and also there is talent that also is American friendly as well. Look at in Jurassic World, the head of the Mizrahi Corporation, when he came on screen, the audience I was with actually cheered. So that's pretty awesome. So I would really just like to see, and Dev Patel, if you want a young Captain Nemo, he could always use the work. And he's not really, unfortunately, a box office draw, but he was great in Chappie. He's a really talented actor, and unfortunately has no roles made available to him. So how about Captain Nemo? Captain Nemo should be a great opportunity for an actor of Indian descent. And I just think it would be, in today's global box office, it would be a really good idea. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea should be a global adventure, so they should have a really diverse cast with all kinds of different, countries represented. A little bit like what you're seeing in Star Wars Rogue One. I'm very curious to see how that movie performs at the box office as a result of that kind of casting. If we want to see more of that kind of casting, those movies have to deliver at the box office. But I'm curious, what do you want to see out of a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea movie? You already have the Disney classic version where James Mason played Captain Nemo. They're like, when that movie was made, they're like, close enough. And of course, Kirk Douglas famously in that film as well. But so you have that. I'd be curious to see. I would have liked to have seen maybe like something like Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan, he's doing that Dunkirk movie. There's so many other, like Akira, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I would have preferred to see David Fincher's version of this property, and he at one point was signed on, but he didn't do it. I think there are a lot of other directors who could have done something more interesting with this, but I'm open to Bryan Singer proving that he was not the B team for this property. But I'm curious, do you have any faith in Bryan Singer's ability to handle this? And do you think it will be better than the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie, which was also horrible? All right, so anyway, that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day is a great story. story. This is like, it's not going to get a lot of attention right now. That's why it's the third story. But I think this has the potential to be a phenomenal film. So Steven Soderbergh, what a shocker, isn't retired. He keeps saying he's retired. He's not retired. He's just being a baby. He's coming back. He retired to television. He didn't like retire. And now he's coming back to movies because the Nick is over, sadly. They're trying to negotiate to have the Nick come back. But it's such a shame. The Nick was such an amazing show. But if you haven't watched the Nick, watch the Nick. Stunning, one of the best TV things I've ever seen on television. There's a lot of good TV on now, though. It's I just watched the first episode of The People vs. O.J. Simpson, the new American crime story show on FX. Stunning. Movies should be really sweating with how good TV is becoming. So anyway, Steven Soderbergh is going back to movies. And so he's reteaming yet again with Channing Tatum. He must have a great relationship with Channing Tatum. And while Channing Tatum did not work out in the Coen brothers' Hail Caesar, I thought he was fantastic in The Hateful Eight. And I think this is going to play more to those strengths. So Steven Soderbergh and Channing Tatum have already teamed up before. Where? Well, of course, Magic Mike. I think the first Magic Mike. That turned out great. Steven Soderbergh actually was the DP on the second Magic Mike. And that movie was solid. It wasn't as good as the first Magic Mike. It was fun. But the Magic Mike train is done. But they also worked on Haywire. He had a small role in Haywire, the Gina Carano movie, which was also okay. And then Side Effects, Channing Tatum had a very small role there. But Side Effects was actually a pretty solid movie. I liked that. It was a little Hitchcock. That movie is worth seeing for Jude Law's performance. But anyway, Steven Soderbergh is going to reteam with Channing Tatum in a lead role for an Ocean's 11 type movie. It's like Channing Tatum is Steven Soderbergh's new George Clooney, and that worked out really well for George Clooney. So anyway, Channing Tatum is going to be in this Ocean's 11 movie, but it's being called Ocean's 11 with Hillbillies, and it's going to be a heist that takes place at a NASCAR-style race. That is such a good idea. Like, if I were a studio executive and Steven Soderbergh said, I'm thinking of making a hillbilly heist movie at a NASCAR race with Channing Tatum, do you want to distribute that? I'd be like, hell yes, especially because I think Steven Soderbergh is a very fiscally responsible director, and I think he's also a very savvy director in terms of commercialism when he wants to be. So I would be like all over that. I'd be like, don't tell anybody else about it, sign this contract right here, and wait till you hear who else might actually be in the movie. So there's a rumor that Michael Shannon will also be in the film. I mean, talk about blowing my mind, and I'm sure many of you, Channing Tatum and Michael Shannon, a hillbilly heist comedy movie directed by Steven Soderbergh about a heist that takes place in a NASCAR race. It's one of the best pitches I've ever heard. So Steven Soderbergh, this leaked, and a couple of people were reporting different stories. At one point, Matt Damon was supposed to be in it, but Steven Soderbergh said that was not true. But he had a great quote that I wanted to share with you when he said, more facts will come, more details will come soon for me, but I understand facts are so 20th century when he was talking about reporting. And I thought that was hilarious because we've talked a lot about rumors being reported now, even the Hollywood Reporter not fact-checking that story about a Labyrinth remake. It's just crazy what's going on. It's the same thing that's happening in the 24-hour news cycle. And again, as I've said before, watch Anchorman 2 for a brilliant and really tough commentary on what news has become in the ratings race. Brilliant. So I'm curious, do you think this is as good an idea as I do? And all I can say is, when are we going to get this movie? I want to watch it now. All right, so for the viewer question, I actually want to talk about the Supergirl Flash crossover because I got so many questions about it yesterday for my thoughts on it. So this, again, kind of a slow news day because we're waiting for the Super Bowl and next weekend with Deadpool versus Zoolander 2. That's when all the movie news is going to hit. So right now it's a little slow. So the Supergirl Flash crossover was able to make some decent headlines. So what's going to happen is the Flash is going to appear on Supergirl on the March 28th episode. Now, the CW and CBS are basically, the same company. CW is a joint venture between CBS and Warner Brothers. So the crossover makes sense company-wise. And now what's interesting is that while The Flash has a stronger fan base, Supergirl actually has higher ratings. So what's the ratings situation? Supergirl started out with a little under 13 million viewers, which is tremendous. However, it has consistently lost viewers week to week, and it is now at about half that, which I think is really devastating. If I were a CBS executive, I'd be like, why the free fall? Which is especially because the show, I think, is very good. I cover it every week. I think it's a good show. And I think that it had a lot of problems to begin with, but it's fixed those problems. So why is it still losing viewers? It's really a shame. But it still has higher ratings than The Flash. The Flash has half of that. So Supergirl right now is around 6.5 million viewers an episode, whereas The Flash is about 3.5 million viewers an episode. So I think, make no mistake, they're trying to get more people interested in The Flash, and then also probably to get some of the more hardcore viewers to watch Supergirl, right? So I think both shows benefit. Who benefits? I think both shows to some degree. Flash with a wider exposure, and then Supergirl trying to get fans to give that show a second look. They really should be playing up David Harewood's John Jones, Martian Manhunter, I think, and also Callista Flockhart. They continually focus just on Melissa Benoist, and she's wonderful, but she's clearly not selling the show. And they have such a stellar supporting cast there. Peter Facinelli as Maxwell Lord, Alex Danvers. I think that they should be playing up that supporting cast much more. Also, even Makad Brooks, Jimmy Olsen, I've really come to like, and Jeremy Jordan's Win Shot. Very, very strong cast, and I think they do not play them up enough to the show's detriment. But also, just for comparison's sake, because I was wondering too, Gotham is the only other comic book show on a major network. Lucifer just started, but that's like kind of a comic book show. It's like based on a comic book, but it's not playing into comic book lore, right? But Gotham obviously very much does. And Gotham is on Fox, and that's interesting enough. It does not have Supergirl's ratings either. Gotham is at the Flash level, about 3.5 to 4 million viewers an episode. It lost a lot from its first season. I like Gotham quite a bit, but it's having a hard time winning over fans as well. Hopefully it stays on the air. I hope so. It's a really good show. But it's interesting. I think it's interesting to see these shows struggle. While the Netflix comic book shows do quite well, and the movies obviously do amazing. It might, I've said before, I think that these comic book shows really act like the mid-range level of someone's comic book stack. They're not the A comics. They're like the B comics. And while there's clearly an audience for that, it's not a huge audience. So I wonder, I think it's obviously working out for the CW, but for network television, comic book characters might not be a good investment for them, and I think they need to be working harder to compete with cable television and stuff like the OJ, the People versus OJ Simpson, which is, I think true crime stuff. And there's lots of different trends out there, but I think it's interesting to see the different audiences break down and where things work out. I'm not too excited for the Supergirl Flash crossover because I don't watch both shows, and I'm curious to see if they can really make it a big event. I can see from some of the Flash promos that he's going to alternate Earths and stuff, so we'll see how they come up with I think they're supposed to be the same Earth with Flash and Supergirl. I think it's interesting they didn't bring Arrow over there, and of course they have the big crossover show Legends of Tomorrow, which seems to be struggling though, from what I can tell. So we'll see how this all shakes out. But I think that basically the shared universe better be careful not to expand, I think, too much, too quickly, and in different directions at the same time, because I think they're going to divide their audience, and they could end up, the whole thing could end up imploding. I think it's in a very delicate position because the viewership isn't huge. So that's my thoughts on the Supergirl Flash crossover. I'm glad so many of you are excited about it. I will definitely be covering that episode. And also, I guess the last thing I want to touch on is a lot of people always say, why don't you watch The Flash? Why don't you watch The Arrow? Well, I'm just too far behind, and I just can't catch up at this point. There's so many things to watch. There's new television happening, and I think that might be a big problem that keeps the show from growing enough. The whole shared universe, because a lot of people just aren't going to double back and watch all the seasons of Arrow, and the whole first season of Flash, and then catch up on the new one. I think that they have to be careful, and I think you're going to eventually see this happen to the movies as well. How much of a commitment are you asking from moviegoers? Because they have other stuff to watch as well, and I think that I think Marvel's already seeing it with their TV shows. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has problems, and also Agent Carter. I dropped Agent Carter. It's just too much of a commitment, and the shows have to be really good. And also because they're a weekly commitment, where something like Netflix, you get it all done at once, done in one, and it's a little bit like a movie event. So, I think that the movie studios and just the entertainment studios in general have to be really cautious in understanding people's time and what they have to devote to these shows. So we'll see what happens. We'll see. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. That's today's episode of Morning Movie News. I hope you enjoyed it. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and that Supergirl Flash crossover, anything that you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and of course, any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.